Okay, so we all know the deal with social media and kids, right? The warnings, the studies, it's a huge concern. But what if a country decided the solution was a total no exceptions ban for anyone under 16? Well, that's not a what if anymore. Australia is actually doing it. And while the goal is, of course, to protect kids, the real cost of that plan, well, it might just be paid by every single adult online.
And look, on the surface, who could argue with that? It's a noble goal, right? Protecting kids' mental health in this crazy digital age. Everyone wants that.
But here's the thing. The second you ask the simple question, how do you actually enforce a ban like this? Everything changes. Suddenly, you're talking about some really heavy stuff. Privacy, surveillance, free speech. And that's the moment you realize, oh, this isn't just about kids anymore, is it?
All right, let's dive into the first part of this, the plan itself, a plan to protect kids. And you got to understand, this is a really popular idea, seen as a straightforward solution to a problem that just keeps getting bigger.
And the evidence for why they're doing this, it's pretty overwhelming, honestly. We're not just talking about university studies linking less screen time to less depression. We're talking about internal research from the big guys, like Meta, basically admitting the negative effects. It seems like the science has found a tipping point. For kids, once you go past about an hour a day, you're getting into a danger zone.
So with all that evidence piling up, it's no surprise this ban is incredibly popular. I mean, a recent survey found that 61% of Australians are on board with this. That's a huge majority. It's so popular, in fact, that it's got support from both sides of the political aisle. Everyone seems to agree.
And let's be really clear here. This is not some gentle suggestion. This is set to be the strictest law of its kind anywhere in the world. We're talking a hard line at 16 years old. Parents can't sign a permission slip for their kids. And any existing accounts for kids under that age, poof, they're just going to be deleted.
Okay, so that brings us to the really tricky part. How does a ban like this actually work? I mean, this is the billion-dollar question, right? How on earth do you tell the difference between a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old online? This is exactly where a simple, popular idea crashes right into a super complicated reality.
As of right now, the government is trying out two main ideas. The first one is pretty much what you'd expect. You verify your age with a government ID. Simple enough. But the second option? Yeah, that one's a lot more controversial. We're talking about using biometric data, things like facial scanning, to prove you're old enough.
But believe it or not, the tech they're looking at gets even wilder. I mean, some of this stuff sounds like it's straight out of a science fiction movie. They're exploring things like these anonymous age assurance tokens, basically a digital key on your device that tells a website, yep, this person's old enough without ever saying who you are. And then there are other ideas, like algorithms that guess your age by analyzing how you act online, or even by listening to your voice.
So you can imagine what happened next. The Prime Minister gets asked point blank, hey, should Australians get ready to scan their faces just to log on to social media? And he gave the kind of answer that, well, you've heard it before. He didn't say yes, but he absolutely did not say no. Instead, he called it a complex area and talked about the importance of privacy, basically doing a perfect sidestep around the actual question.
And that brings us to the big catch, the real twist in this whole story. Because it turns out, in the mission to find and verify every single kid online, there's a consequence, and it's one that affects every single adult.
This all came out in a legislative hearing, and it was wow. A senator basically asked, so let me get this straight. For this to work, it isn't just about collecting data on kids. You'd have to check literally everybody who wants to use social media, wouldn't you? And the official answer they got back was just one word: yes. And digital rights activists like Meredith Whittaker, they put it even more bluntly. She basically said that banning people under 16 this way just won't work. To pull it off, you'd have to create a system that monitors internet use for the entire population. Think about it. You can't find out who's under 16 unless you check everyone. It's a total all-or-nothing deal.
So yeah, the conclusion is pretty simple, and it's kind of unavoidable. To find the kids, you have to check everybody's ID. A law that started out being about children ends up pulling in the entire population.
Okay, so this is where the story gets even wider. Because this social media ban isn't just happening on its own, in a vacuum. When you start to zoom out and look at other digital laws being passed in Australia around the same time, well, you start to see a pattern. You start to connect some dots.
Just look at the timeline here. In late 2023, the government introduces a pretty controversial misinformation bill. Then, in early 2024, a national digital ID bill gets passed. And right after that, mid-2024, this social media ban gets pushed through.
When you line them up like that, well, for a lot of people, that starts to look less like a coincidence and a lot more like a deliberate strategy.
And this is what leads critics, like Professor Lisa Given, to ask a really pointed question. She's basically saying, maybe this social media ban is just a Trojan horse, a way to get something else through the gates. Is the real goal here to make that new national digital ID system something that's absolutely essential for your everyday life online?
Now, it's worth pointing out that these big government plans aren't unstoppable. Remember that misinformation bill from the timeline? It faced such massive, universal opposition. We're talking from every political party, and even the United Nations chimed in, that the government had no choice but to scrap it entirely. So public pushback can absolutely work.
All right, so let's get to the bigger question here, the heart of the debate. Because what we're left with is this fundamental conflict, right? You have this really noble goal on one side, and on the other, a solution that's not just risky, but might not even work in the first place. So let's just lay out the final trade-off. The stated goal is great. Protect kids, encourage them to get outside, give them back their childhood. But then you look at the potential risks. Mass surveillance for everybody. The very real possibility that kids will just migrate to riskier, darker, unregulated apps. And you could be taking away online support networks that are a literal lifeline for some isolated kids. It's a heavy balance sheet.
And beyond all those huge privacy fears, there are some really practical problems here that make people doubt it will even work. For starters, a simple little tool called the VPN could make this whole thing pointless. A kid can just turn on a VPN, make it look like they're in another country, and poof, the ban is useless. And this is exactly why so many critics are saying, look, this should be a parent's job, not the government's.
So, where does that leave us right now? Well, here's the wild part. The bill has actually passed. It is officially the law. But, and this is a huge but, the government still hasn't figured out, or at least hasn't told anyone, how they're going to enforce it. The law is on the books, but the method for making it work is still a total mystery.
And this leads to a pretty fascinating, maybe even ironic twist. The government has basically turned around and tossed this massive, complicated, technical, and ethical problem right back to the tech companies themselves. That's right, companies like Meta and Google are now being told, okay guys, you need to help us figure out how to enforce this law. The law that's designed to restrict you.
And that leaves us all with one final, really critical question to think about. Everyone agrees that protecting kids online is important. Nobody's debating that. But in the rush to solve that problem, is Australia accidentally building a system of mass surveillance where the cure ends up being way, way more dangerous than the disease?